Whenever I play a Zelda game, there are a lot of things I look forward to, but something that makes Zelda such a unique franchise is the creativity and complexity of its dungeons. So I want to take a deeper look into what makes some dungeons better than others. I think we can all agree that there are many that don't really stand out, such as inside Jabu Jabu's belly from Ocarina of Time, but there are also plenty that do remain relevant and are usually in top 10 lists for Zelda dungeons. And one of those is the dungeon I'll be focusing on today in my first dungeon breakdown, Skyward Sword's Ancient Cistern. Instead of just speaking on things I like and don't like, I want to break it down into smaller variables, in which I can discuss multiple dungeons based off the same criteria. So, what makes a Zelda dungeon stand out? Let's start off talking about what makes a good atmosphere in a Zelda dungeon, and then relate it to the Ancient Cistern. Keep in mind that this is based off my opinion and how I'm breaking it down. If you disagree, or have some ideas of your own that I didn't cover, please let me know in the comments below. Let's break the atmosphere down into smaller categories, all of which are interconnected to make up for an immersive experience. Is it an organic environment? How is the music? What are the enemies like? And is it in a unique setting? Let's take this a bit further. I think some things that make up for an organic environment are its purpose or setting. For example, the Goron Mines is a mining facility, that's its purpose, but it's also in an organic setting within Death Mountain and also the Goron's home. Not all good Zelda dungeons need a purpose for it to be considered organic. I think the Ancient Cistern is a good example of this, as on the surface, it is not really clear on its purpose, but it definitely feels though it is meant to be where it is. Something that helps make it feel this way is the music. Personally, I'm not a music guru by any means, so I can't tell you why a theme is or isn't great by breaking it down with the instruments, but I can give you my opinion on if it matches the theme of the dungeon. I don't think the Ancient Cistern's theme is overly special, especially when compared to some others, such as the eerie sound of the theme in the Forest Temple of Ocarina of Time. But the song in the Ancient Cistern does help make me feel as if I'm immersed within the dungeon, so I would say it matches the theme fairly well with its almost neutral tone, as it isn't necessarily uplifting nor scary, but more so emotionless. The same can't be said for the underground theme. This sound is lifeless. You feel as though you are somewhere you don't belong, probably because you don't. To relate back to the organicness of the dungeon, you would think the underground would feel out of place, but it doesn't. The transition to the underworld seems seamless, and it just sparks more curiosity into what the dungeon is supposed to be. To further this thought, cursed bokoblins even appear, which had yet to be seen in the Zelda franchise. And something that I think goes unnoticed in a lot of games is the placement and theme of enemies. The Zelda franchise does a better job with this than a lot of other games. And to elaborate on it a bit more, when I say theme, I'm talking about enemies that match the environment they are in. Some may be unique to the dungeon, such as the cursed bokoblins or the Furnics. And yes, I know the Furnics are not unique to the dungeon, but they are first introduced there, which makes them feel unique at the time. I think this helps build the atmosphere and immersive experience within not just the dungeon, but the game. This doesn't mean all the enemies need to be unique to build a great atmosphere. You still have the green bokoblins, the Scatollas, and the Choo-Choos scattered throughout as well. But they feel as if they belong within the dungeon, and this is because of their placement. The proper placement of enemies helps build the atmosphere and makes the game feel immersive. The Zelda franchise usually does a great job putting enemies in places that make sense. For example, this bokoblin holding onto the key here seems to be guarding this waterway, or how the Stalfos mini-boss is guarding the whip, which is actually also another example of a unique enemy to the dungeon. Even the Deku Babas have solid placement sometimes. You can find them blocking paths or guarding switches or levers such as these ones. I don't care to go further and talk about how or why they are in the dungeon, I'm just happy that it feels right, which is something that I think deserves more recognition. So the Ancient Cistern does have everything I just discussed. It feels like it's an organic setting, the music matches the environment, there are distinct enemies and most of them fit the theme of the dungeon. But is the setting unique? I thought about putting unique within the organic category, but then I thought just because it's an organic environment or it has a function does not mean that it stands out. Look at Dodongo's Cavern. Yes, it's organic within the mountainside, but it doesn't stand out, and something that reminds me of it is the Earth Temple and Skyward Sword. They both are within a volcano and have a fairly basic setting when compared to some others. This is where the Ancient Cistern shines. It is very unique within the franchise, and it is definitely a change of pace for a water dungeon. The temple layout has one main hub and a few separate areas around it, but it also has the dark underground background area, which is how it truly differentiates itself. Personally, I think the atmosphere of the Ancient Cistern is very immersive, but the atmosphere alone doesn't make it a great dungeon. The gameplay within Zelda's temples have a huge impact on the overall experience you have. Traditionally, they're full of puzzles, whether it be moving blocks, flipping switches, manipulating the environment, or defeating enemies. But around halfway through the dungeon, you usually discover an item that will then be used throughout the rest of the dungeon. I honestly had a tough time coming up with the gameplay variables, but I finally broke it down into puzzles, items, and the challenge. Puzzles are a tough thing to dissect, because they're all very different, and at the end of the day, it is very subjective. So I tried to pick out some things that I enjoyed when solving puzzles within the Zelda franchise. Puzzle gating is basically when you discover a locked door and you must find an alternative route to which will eventually lead you to a key or something that will help you progress. Puzzle gating has always been a staple to the franchise, and of course the Ancient Cistern is full of this. I don't necessarily love backtracking to find a key, but when you do have to, it opens you up to exploration and forces you to pay close attention to your environment. This is my second playthrough of Skyward Sword, but it has been years since my first, so when I came across this door and had to strike it a certain pattern, I was a bit frustrated because I knew I had missed something. Instead of going back, I hit it a bunch first, but the answer was of course in the main room. But when you do eventually make your way past a roadblock, it feels that much more satisfying. Gating alone doesn't make a good puzzle, but it helps the experience be less linear. Personally, I don't mind linearity too much. I only mind it if it prevents the game from being challenging. You all might be wondering what I mean by saying organic within puzzles. Basically, I found that I enjoy manipulating the environments within dungeons. The Ancient Cistern has you flipping lily pads plenty as a means of opening paths forward. This may not be too complex, but it's the little things that make you aware of your surroundings, and in case you haven't noticed, there's a giant statue at the center of the dungeon. This, to an extent, I would consider to be a macro puzzle. In past Zelda games, I seem to enjoy dungeons that have a main hub in which you must always return to. I love the Forest Temple in Ocarina of Time and enjoyed returning to that main room after killing the Poe sisters. And although I did not enjoy the Snowhead Temple of Majora's Mask, I know a lot of people do, and it's a good example of a macro puzzle. You are tasked with destroying the pillars in the center of the dungeon to continue progressing toward the boss. In the Ancient Cistern, you must lower and raise the level of the Great Statue on a few occasions to continue progressing. Although this is a bit more indirect than the Snowhead Temple, it is a key aspect of the dungeon and involves environmental manipulation to retrieve the boss key. You're teased with the boss key midway through the dungeon, which I thought was a great way to build anticipation. Speaking of anticipation, it's always exciting when you discover a new item to add to Link's arsenal. And in this dungeon, I would say the whip is a lot of fun. It's a shame it becomes almost unnecessary later in the game, because in this dungeon, it makes maneuverability easier and it's very smooth with the motion controls. You can use the whip plenty throughout, even as a means to defeat the Phoenixes. But what I really enjoyed about the item usage here is that you have to utilize almost everything you currently have. You'll find yourself using the slingshot and the beetle on a few occasions. I think a lot of dungeons will sacrifice all other item use once the new item is discovered. So I appreciate that the Ancient Cistern didn't fully abandon them, because knowing you may have to use a pre-dungeon item makes the possibilities of puzzles a lot more varied. I don't think a dungeon needs to be overly challenging to be considered good, but it shouldn't be a breeze either. The puzzles should make you stop and think from time to time to assess your surroundings. Something that is unique to Skyward Sword is that fighting enemies is like solving a mini puzzle. Whether it be swinging your sword a specific direction or utilizing an item, the enemies in pre-Breath of the Wild 3D Zeldas have never been too hard, so I don't expect to be too threatened by a few Bako goblins. However, in the Ancient Cistern, the forum style foes did give me some trouble. I'm fairly average in my sword ability in the game, so I struggled to hit this sweet spot on multiple occasions. This would frustrate me, causing me to spam and eventually be hit. It still felt like a fresh challenge to me though that I wish the game offered more. Solving these mini enemy puzzles in Skyward Sword is a unique experience to the franchise, but at the end of the dungeons, you have to solve a larger puzzle in the boss fight. Whenever I hear people discuss bosses, it's always about how imposing they look or challenging they are. I think there's a lot more to a boss fight than just a look and challenge. Yes, I would agree a boss should be imposing in its design, or else what is there to fear? But I also think they should carry a bit of personality with them as well. To better explain that, let's look at this 1,000-year Arachnid. He's definitely imposing, and although he wasn't too challenging, I found that the gameplay in this fight was enjoyable. So why is it not looked at as a great fight? Well, he's literally just a giant scorpion, and you even fight another one later on. I'm not saying all bosses need to carry personalities like Girahim, but they should all have at least a bit of characterization. The Ancient Cistern's Galactos at a glance may seem like a mechanical object induced with cursed energy. Well, that's because it is. But Galactos was placed there for a reason, more than likely to guard something, and once it's revived and begins attacking you, you can even see the neutral face turn into a smile as the fight progresses. And let's not forget that terrible sound it makes upon its defeat. There's definitely at least a little personality there. I would also say Galactos suits the environment well by matching the Buddhist theme in golden colors. Galactos will attack you in a few different ways, including throwing its weapons at you, crushing you with its arms, or slicing you with its swords, all which can be evaded using the dodge button. Because his attacks are fairly slow, it can be easy to get out of the way, which reduces the challenge of the fight. I don't think it was a cakewalk, as you can see my health is pretty low here, but that could also be because of my lackluster sword ability. Zelda bosses traditionally are also not too challenging. Now, of course, the original Nintendo 64 titles may have you on edge with their bosses, but with the advancement in technology, the bosses have become more balanced. Even though Galactos failed to take a life from me, I still appreciated the challenge. I believe a key reason I enjoyed the gameplay of this fight was the item usage within it. I had a great time ripping its arms off with a whip, and to follow that up, you can use its own sword to begin cutting it down, which is definitely something that is unique within the franchise. I believe a variable that goes largely unnoticed when speaking on boss fights is the atmosphere. This includes the buildup of the fight, whether it be through foreshadowing through environmental elements or pre-fight cutscene. An example of this are the baby spiders you find throughout the Temple of Time before fighting Armagoma in Twilight Princess. The Zelda franchise has always done a great job with this, and it helps immerse you within the fight as well as build anticipation. I find a lot of titles don't really try to do this, especially in RPGs. Games such as Dark Souls, The Witcher, Elden Ring, they all kind of just throw bosses at you and it can feel random at times. There's not always a build-up or a cutscene as you're just immediately in the fight. However, in those games, bosses are plentiful and usually offer greater challenge than in Zelda. So the Zelda franchise makes up for this through other means. Boss fights within this franchise usually require identifying the enemy weak point and utilizing an item to expose this weak point. The boss door in the Ancient Cistern is found relatively early in the dungeon, and the boss key is seen before you can actually obtain it. These discrete instances may not seem like a lot, but they put the boss fight in your mind the entire dungeon. Once the boss key is obtained, you must use the whip to raise the floor on top of the great statue. Finally, you may enter the boss room where you find Girahim sitting on top of Galactos. Although the cutscene is brief, it does offer a bit of characterization, and of course it builds anticipation. I don't think the pre and post cutscenes were overly special, but I'm happy they have them. After covering many aspects of the boss fight, it's clear Galactos seems to check most of the variables in gameplay, design, and atmosphere. But a big part in atmosphere is the music. I would say that the theme of this fight is captivating and matches the scene, and in my opinion, I would also argue that it's fairly memorable, although there are some other boss themes I considered more memorable, such as Twin Rovas. But overall, Galactos is a great addition to the dungeon. Skyward Sword's Ancient Cistern does a lot of things right and only has a few things it could do better. After breaking it down more, I think some variables that stand out within the dungeon are its unique dual atmospheres, enjoyable dungeon item, and engaging boss fight. I had a lot of fun making this video and definitely would like to create more dungeon breakdowns in the future. I'd also like to hear your thoughts on the Ancient Cistern, and let me know in the comments below if I missed any important categories or if you all have another dungeon you would like me to cover. So until next time, peace out.